All right, let's jump into another deep dive. Today, we're exploring the story of Charles Jackson.
Oh, the East Base Lair.
Yeah, you got it.
You sent over some excerpts from his Wikipedia page,
I did.
and it's a pretty chilling read.
It is. It is.
Um, you know what I think is really fascinating about this case is it's like a time capsule
Yeah.
of forensic science, you know?
Right.
Back then, it was eyewitness accounts
Right.
and kind of the limited physical evidence they could gather.
Mm-hmm.
But then, years later, DNA technology really changes the game,
Totally. Yeah, it's like,
linking him to crimes that they never would have been able to solve back then.
that's what makes this deep dive so interesting.
Mhm.
We're not just looking at the crimes themselves,
Right.
but how we investigate and how we understand them has evolved.
Exactly.
Before we get into all that, though,
Yeah.
we're sticking to the facts from the sources you provided.
Of course. Yes.
No speculation or anything like that.
Just the facts, ma'am.
Okay, so the man himself, Charles Jackson.
Let's get into it.
The source material paints a pretty bleak picture of his early life.
Yeah.
Growing up in poverty.
Louisiana.
Yeah, Louisiana and Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah.
An abusive, alcoholic father.
Right. And that kind of stuff can,
It's got to leave its mark.
it really can. Those adverse childhood experiences,
Right.
experts often link that to
Uh-huh.
a higher risk of aggression, difficulties forming healthy relationships.
Right. So it's not an excuse,
No, of course not.
but it maybe offers some insight.
Potential insight, yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like, those early cracks only widened as he got older.
They did, yeah.
His criminal record starting at 16. Theft. Yeah.
Petty theft, right.
But then it escalated.
Burglary, assault.
Assault, rape, child molestation.
Yeah. Offenses spanning 2 decades.
It's a clear sign that things were spiraling.
Yeah, and it kind of raises the question of,
Uh-oh.
were there some missed opportunities for intervention?
Yeah.
Right.
That's a scary thought.
Could something have been done earlier to prevent this?
Oh, man.
It's a chilling thought.
It is. It's like watching a ticking time bomb. But no one had the tools to defuse it.
Exactly.
And then in September 1981, he's released from prison again.
And that's when the real nightmare begins.
Yeah, between 1975 and 1982,
Yeah.
at least 8 victims.
But we'll get into that.
We will, but the number may be even higher.
Could be, yeah.
Okay, so let's get into those specific cases,
All right.
because each one tells a piece of this story.
Mm-hmm.
First, June of 1975, 19-year-old Sonia Higginbotham.
Murdered in her Oakland home.
Sexually assaulted, stabbed to death.
It's horrifying.
And then just 2 months later, 27-year-old Ann Johnson.
Similar fate.
Yeah, in her Montclair home.
Brutality, sexual violence.
It's a recurring pattern.
Tragically familiar as we look at these cases.
It's just, can you imagine the fear back then?
I can't even. It would have been.
Before DNA testing, before the kind of profiling we have today, people must have just felt like a monster was lurking in the shadows,
And they wouldn't have been wrong.
striking at random.
And that randomness makes it even scarier, right?
Absolutely.
You don't know who's next. You don't know where it's coming from.
And then in 1978, it takes an even more heartbreaking turn.
Oh, no.
11-year-old Cynthia Waxman,
Oh, jeez.
abducted while playing in a field.
Terrible.
Body later found nearby.
The innocence of a child just stolen.
If we look at the timeline,
Okay.
we see that escalation we talked about.
The violence is getting worse.
Yeah, growing disregard for human life.
There's rage there, pure rage.
Yeah, it's like a descent into darkness.
It really is.
And it doesn't end there.
No, it keeps going.
November 1981, Henry and Edith Vila,
An elderly couple.
stabbed to death in their Albany Hill home.
Oh, my goodness.
Edith had also been sexually assaulted.
Interesting. Albany Hill.
Yeah,
That wasn't his usual.
right. Quieter, more residential.
Suggests maybe he was expanding his reach.
Getting bolder.
Yeah, exactly.
Weeks later, Betty Jo Grunsweig is attacked in her Oakland home. She manages to tell her daughter, I think he was a rapist,
Oh, wow.
before dying on the way to the hospital.
That's awful.
And here's the chilling part. She'd been confiding in friends, feeling watched,
Oh, no.
receiving strange phone
But
calls.
just she knew something was wrong.
It's like she sensed the danger.
Just gives me chills.
And just days after that, Gail Leslie Slocum, 34 years old,
Another life taken.
stabbed to death in her own yard.
This violence is relentless.
And each victim represents a ripple effect of pain and trauma.
You're right. It goes way beyond just the individual.
Absolutely. And then, January 5th, 1982, the case takes a turn.
Okay.
Joan Stewart, a San Francisco City College biology professor,
Okay.
raped, strangled, and stabbed near Montclair.
This is the one that leads to his capture.
It is, and it's an incredible example of how seemingly small details can be crucial.
Totally, yeah.
In this case, it was a half-eaten piece of Canadian bacon.
What? Canadian bacon?
I know, right? Found on Joan Stewart's body.
How does that even...
Well, during the investigation, police learned that Jackson had this very particular breakfast habit.
Oh.
His mother would wrap up a piece of Canadian bacon for him every morning before he went to work.
So they found the bacon and thought of him?
Yep, that's all it took.
It's amazing what can crack a case wide open.
And then they also had his license plate number from witnesses.
Oh, so they have multiple things.
Yeah, saw a suspicious vehicle.
Gotcha.
That was enough to get him arrested.
Okay, so he's finally caught.
Convicted in 1983, sentenced to life.
Life in prison, wow.
But there was a retrial in 1986.
What happened?
Judicial error, but same sentence.
Okay, so back to prison.
But this is really just the beginning of the story.
Oh, why?
Because now we have DNA technology entering the picture.
That changes everything.
In 1999, DNA testing linked Jackson to the double homicide of Henry and Edith Vila,
The elderly couple.
a case that had gone cold for nearly 2 decades.
Wow, talk about a breakthrough.
It not only solidifies his guilt, but it raises the possibility that he was responsible for even more.
Oh no, this can't be good.
And in 2005, further DNA testing linked him to 5 more victims. Higginbotham, Johnson, Waxman, Gruenswig, and Slocum.
So from 1 conviction to 7 victims.
It makes you wonder how many other cases might be out there unsolved.
How many families are still waiting for answers?
It's terrifying to think about.
The unsettling reality of serial killers.
They operate under the radar for years, leaving a trail of devastation.
And even when caught, the full extent of their crimes might never be known.
And here's another layer to this story.
What's that?
Other serial killers were operating in the Bay Area during the same period.
Oh, wow, like who?
The source mentioned several names: Anthony McKnight, Joseph James D'Angelo, Joseph Nanso, Philip Joseph Hughes Jr., Roger Kibbe, and Franklin Lynch.
All at the same time as Jackson.
Overlapping cases, a complex web of unsolved murders.
It must have been chaos for investigators.
An atmosphere of fear I can't even imagine.
So Jackson was just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
The Bay Area during that time, it sounds terrifying.
It does, it really does.
And while some of these killers were eventually brought to justice,
Right.
others may have escaped detection completely.
It's a scary thought.
We may never know the full extent of the violence.
But amidst all this darkness,
Yeah,
we have to remember there's light, too.
I like that.
Advances in forensic science, the hard work of investigators.
The resilience of the victims' families.
It all offers hope.
It does. It really does.
It does.
So how do we as a society grapple with the knowledge of this darkness? How do we learn from it without being overwhelmed?
I think understanding is key, right?
Understanding
the motivations.
Okay.
The methods, the warning signs.
So we can be better prepared.
Exactly. Create a safer world.
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
So what are the key takeaways from all of this?
Well, first, it highlights the impact of violence.
The darkest aspects of human nature.
Evil doesn't always announce itself. It can hide in plain sight.
But it also showcases the power of science, right?
It does.
The pursuit of justice, the resilience of the human spirit.
Jackson's case shows us that even in the face of horror, we can seek answers, demand accountability, and honor the victims.
And maybe most importantly, it underscores the need for vigilance.
Right. A society that prioritizes prevention, intervention, and rehabilitation.
Breaking the cycle of violence.
Creating a world where these tragedies become a distant memory.
It's been a heavy conversation.
It has.
But important, I think.
Absolutely.
Facing these truths, understanding human behavior.
That's vital.
And amidst all this, don't forget,
Yeah.
there are people out there making a difference.
Therapists, social workers, law enforcement.
Victim advocates, dedicated to preventing violence.
They're the unsung heroes.
Battling the darkness.
We're not alone in this fight.
That's a powerful message to carry with us.
It is.
Depths of human depravity, but also the resilience of the human spirit.
The pursuit of justice. The hope for a brighter future.
It's a complex tapestry of dark and light.
We can't lose sight of either one.
So, as we conclude this part of our deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with this. What does this case and the other serial killers operating at the same time
Okay.
tell us about how far we've come in criminal justice?
Our understanding of criminal behavior.
Forensic science, victim support.
It's all come a long way.
I encourage our listeners to explore further.
Yes.
Maybe dive into the stories of those other serial killers.
The more we understand,
the more we can work towards a safer future for everyone.
Well said.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
Keep diving deep.
We'll be back in just a moment to continue our deep dive into the world of Charles Jackson, the East Bay Slayer.
Looking forward to it.
Stay with us.
It's crazy to think, while all this is happening with Jackson, there were other serial killers operating in the Bay Area.
I know, it's like, how do investigators even wrap their heads around that?
Trying to track multiple predators, it's got to be overwhelming.
Absolutely. Trying to connect the dots while knowing there could be multiple monsters out there.
And each one, they had their own, MO.
Yeah, their own twisted signature.
Like Anthony Midnight.
Oh, the babysitter killer.
Yeah, he targeted women he knew, offered to babysit their kids.
Oh, that's just awful.
Before committing the crimes.
It's terrifying. Evil hiding in plain sight.
Someone you'd trust, someone you'd let into your home.
And then you've got Joseph James DeAngelo.
Golden State Killer.
Yeah, his reign of terror lasted for years.
Rapes, burglaries, murders, all across California.
DeAngelo's case was huge for forensic science. They finally caught him using genealogy websites.
Decades after his crimes.
It was revolutionary, but also it kind of raises some questions.
About privacy, using genetic information.
Yeah, it's complex.
It is, definitely.
And the list goes on. Joseph Nasso, the alphabet killer.
His victims' names all started with the same letter.
Then there's Philip Joseph Hughes Jr., targeting young women.
Roger Kibbe, the I-5 strangler.
And Franklin Lynch.
All operating in the Bay Area.
So Jackson, as bad as he was just one part of this much bigger, darker picture.
The Bay Area during that time, it must have been terrifying.
Some of these guys were brought to justice.
But some might have slipped through the cracks.
We may never know the full extent of it all.
It's a haunting thought, but even with all the darkness,
you
gotta remember the light.
I like it.
The advances in science, the investigators.
The families fighting for justice.
It all offers hope.
It does. It really does. So how do we, as a society, deal with this darkness? How do we learn and not just get swallowed up by it?
Understanding. I think that's the key.
Okay, what do you mean?
Understanding the why, the how, what to look out for.
So we can prevent it. Be prepared.
Exactly. Create a safer world.
Knowledge is power.
It really is.
Okay, so if we're trying to wrap all this up, what are the big takeaways here?
Well, for me, it's the impact, the devastation that violence leaves behind.
Yeah, that darkness inside some people.
And how evil can be disguised as someone normal, someone you might even trust.
But at the same time, we've seen how far science has come.
That's right.
The fight for justice, the strength of those families.
Jackson's case, it shows that even with unimaginable horror, people can still fight for answers, hold people accountable, remember those who were lost.
And I think this is the big one. We have to be vigilant.
Absolutely, we have to be.
A society that focuses on preventing this, helping people before it gets to this point.
Breaking the cycle, making these kinds of tragedies a thing of the past.
It's been a tough conversation.
It has.
But we need to have these conversations,
We do. We need to confront the stuff head on.
And don't forget, there are people out there working to make a difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All those people in therapy, social work, law enforcement.
The victim advocates.
They're fighting against this darkness every day.
And doing incredible work.
We're not alone in this.
Absolutely not.
It's a good thing to remember when we're talking about all this awfulness.
We have to hold on to that.
It's like, yeah, there's this human depravity, but there's also this incredible strength, this fight for justice, this hope for a better future.
It's both sides of the coin, the dark and the light.
And we can't forget either one.
Exactly.
All right, so back to Charles Jackson.
Okay.
All those unanswered questions.
Right, let's get into that.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Charles Jackson, the East Bay Slayer.
Back into the darkness.
We've really been through a lot, exploring his crimes.
Yeah, and the other serial killers active at the same time. Just crazy.
It really makes you think, Even with Jackson behind bars.
And the DNA evidence.
There's still so much we don't know.
So many questions.
We know he was responsible for at least 7 murders.
At least.
But the source material says his true victim count is unknown.
It's possible there are more out there.
With so many other killers operating in the Bay Area, then
it's like a tangled web, so hard to unravel.
And that brings up the question that I think haunts every investigation into a serial killer.
Oh yeah, that question.
Could there be more victims? How many families are still out there waiting for answers?
It's a heavy thought.
It's heartbreaking, and it shows how these crimes have such a lasting impact.
It's not just the victims themselves, it's their families.
Your communities, even generations down the line.
That sense of safety, once it's gone, it's hard to get back.
And when there are unanswered questions,
It just makes it worse. Those wounds can't heal.
it shows that finding justice isn't always a clear-cut process.
Not at all. It can be a long road.
With twists and turns, dead ends, and sometimes no real closure.
But even without a definitive answer,
Yeah,
I think it's still important to keep searching for the truth,
absolutely.
piecing together the past, honoring the victims.
And recognizing that their loss still matters.
That's where the work of investigators and forensic scientists is so vital.
And victim advocates.
They're the ones who keep the memory alive.
They don't let the victims be forgotten.
And they never give up on the truth. It's inspiring.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought.
Okay.
What does all of this, the case of Charles Jackson, the fact that there were all these other serial killers operating at the same time,
Yeah.
what does it tell us about how far we've come in terms of criminal justice?
You're right. Think about it, how we understand criminal behavior now.
Forensic science, how we support victims.
It's all evolved so much since then.
And hopefully, as we keep learning and growing,
Yeah,
we can prevent these kinds of tragedies in the future.
I hope so.
I encourage everyone listening to keep exploring, maybe even dive into the stories of those other serial killers mentioned in the source material.
It's important to learn about this stuff.
The more we understand, the more we can work towards a safer world.
Knowledge is power.
That's right. Well said.
It's been a heavy deep dive.
It has been, but an important one.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep exploring, keep learning,
Keep diving deep.
and keep diving deep.